Howdy, howdy, folks. Uh, 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago today, bad day. Today, good day. Let's see. What can we talk about before we get into topic? While we let folks get in, I spent some time over at a friend's fish room today. Friend may or may not be in chat. Did some filming, so we're gonna compile a video out of that. Probably not this week's video, but probably next week, just because it'll take a lot more time to edit. There's a lot of B-roll, things like that I have to go through. Um, yeah, got to see my fish at someone else's fish room. So for those in chat, you know exactly who I'm talking about. But yeah, it was good. Got to enjoy a little bit of today. Had a couple of different phone calls, all related to my job search. So that's been interesting. It's been kind of a whirlwind of a day. Yeah. Yeah. Been good. Let's see. What's the other thing? This Saturday is the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society's general auction, which is the big boy auction. So if you happen to be up in the Northwest and can make it to Seattle, it's fantastic. It's right on the front page of gsas.org, but I'll put that in chat for folks that want to take a look. So if you're in the area and for some reason you haven't seen details on this, it's right on the front page of gsas.org. I'll be there, absolutely. A lot of people will be there. Might even see like folks like Dean. So that should be quite enjoyable if you happen to be in the Northwest. And then about another month, basically, it almost lines up perfectly. Then there will be an auction at the Greater Portland Aquarium Society. So if you're really itching for a ton of stuff, maybe you got a lot of new tanks or one really big tank you're trying to fill out, you got two auctions up in the Northwest to hang out with fish nerds, which should be a ton of fun. And I think I'm going to be at both. my schedule's relatively open, so yeah, probably be at both of those. Let's see. Before we dive into the topic, kind of the last thing I want to cover is a slight self-promotion that if you're not in the Northwest, but maybe you're toward the East Coast or Midwest, you will actually have an opportunity to see me and a number of other people at the Keystone Clash later this year in September. So if you're near Keystone Clash, which is in Morgantown, Pennsylvania, it's about half an hour away from Philadelphia or so, consider grabbing a ticket, coming out, saying hi. There's going to be a number of us, YouTube dum-dums that'll be there, and a lot of other smart people, including like Dan from Dan's Fish. The eminent Kelly Foreman will be there. Jason from Primetime Aquatics will be there. And then there's like actual legitimate good fish people that will be there instead of like, me. But if you really want to laugh at a few things, I'll be talking twice. And I think I'm also on a panel chat, if I remember right. Which is like going to be Dan's Fish, myself, and Kelly Foreman. I think that's now official that they'll do a panel chat about rainbows with the three of us. So I'll basically be there to represent the internet as opposed to the professional fish people. Oh, man. Raphael S. I'll answer this quick question. Any plans for Earth Day? As of right now, not really. I'll probably do a bunch of filter maintenance in my aquariums. Yeah. I don't do specific things on many holidays in general. I actually use holidays as days to like kind of just relax and chill. That's what most of my holidays are, or they're a time to just enjoy family time, and I include my dogs in family time. So yeah, I don't do big stuff. Although when I did used to do things specifically for Earth Day, they were surrounded with my work because some of my previous work places have done things for Workday that encourage a lot of the staff, whether they were contract or full-time, to participate. And I would regularly participate in those things. Microsoft did a lot of stuff for a while I was working there. It's a lot of fun. Okay. Leo, I'll get your question in a little bit. I want to talk about the topic real briefly. So I don't think this is a long topic, but it comes after my visit, which you will have a video for that relatively soon, to a friend's fish room. And kind of things of like I'm thinking about in my future whenever I can set up my own proper fish room, with that big quotation marks. I kind of have a sort of fish room and then tanks spread throughout my house. But when I can set something up that's more purposefully designed, as opposed to ramshackled together because my multiple tank syndrome took over parts of my house. So a lot of us, when we're looking at ways to make things easier in aquatics, and this isn't like, don't take this as like the do less water changes kind of mentality of like, that makes things easier, which is totally not true. It can make things way more complicated if you don't have the right setup. And there's plenty of videos that explain how that is possible. I think I even have one. But more on the lines of like adding automation. So automatic water change systems, we've seen this all the time. There's lots of people who have built their fish rooms and have these amazing automatic water change systems. Master Breeder Dean has an amazing one. Corey always has automatic water change all over. He's got it in his store. He's got it in his personal fish room. For those of us who travel a lot, or maybe we just have very busy work schedules, but we love keeping our fish, maybe we look at things like automatic feeders to help make sure that we're not missing feeding and there's regular food going in for our fish. Are these things good or bad? And I'm going to fight from both angles. You guys know I love playing devil's advocate, right? So we're going to go first from the good. Automatic water changes are a very good thing. And the reason why I say this is when we're busy, assuming we've set the system up correctly and we have everything in place to do them right, so there's not risk of flooding your fish room or just, any number of other leaks and etc. problems that can occur. Automatic water changes are amazing because continuous or regular amounts of fresh water going into your aquarium directly impact fish health in a very positive manner. A number of fish basically in the wild are waiting for certain times of year to where their spawning is going to happen more often. And simulating the rainy season with lots of water changes is usually how we do that. Corydoras, lots of different species of Eastern fish that come from East Asia and things like that. Most of them, it's during the rainy season when there's lots more food, there's plentiful amounts of water, there's not tighter spaces, there's more room for everything to kind of spread out and claim small territories and things like that. These tend to be when a lot of species of fish do a prolific amount of breeding. And so this can be a big positive, especially if we're trying to actively, continuously breed fish in our fish room. Those continuous water changes, whether it's like, I do a 50% water change every day, or maybe it's like, yeah, I change like 10% of my water every day, or maybe it's, I have 2 water changes a week, whatever it may be, something that makes it easier for you to do lots of water changes, especially if you have multiple tanks or several very large tanks. These are a huge benefit to your fish's health. And one of the best adages I've heard from a number of friends is the best thing you can do for your fish is give them fresh water. Which is to say that by diluting any excess minerals or just balancing out things, how they occur in your tank, kind of refreshing your carbonate hardness when you do water changes, whatever that may be, these are all options of how we can see good improvements. You have to forgive me. My wife is like half trolling me in chat, so I have to laugh. But these are good improvements. But let's talk about how automatic water change can be a negative. Can it be a negative? Yes. And let me explain why. Some of us will set up automated systems so that we can just ignore it and not have to do that work. We're willing to spend the cost to not do the extra labor. And what this can cause for certain people is complacency. You can get so reliant on the fact that, well, I've just got an automatic system that does this for me, that you might stop paying attention to the amount of detritus in your tanks. Or you may think in the case of this that like, oh, well, I've got automatic water changes, so I can heavily feed my tanks no matter what. I can overfeed my tanks because maybe you're trying to fatten up extra fish or really get them to spawn. But even with automatic water changes, you'll still cause a significant amount of detritus. And that detritus isn't always getting removed by those water changes. So you can slowly over time build up an actual problem that the water change cannot overcome. Okay? However, I think this is very unlikely. Most of the time, if you want my pure opinion, it's very rare for people to get that complacent. Usually, when this happens, it's because we're automating too many systems. So let's talk about auto feeders. Where's the benefit? Do you travel a lot? Are you on vacation? Is it a temporary thing? Maybe it's like, hey, I'm going on vacation. I just want to make sure my fish get fed every day. Auto feeders are perfect for that. If you only have like one tank or two tanks and you're not trying to feed like 50 of them, they're great because they're not very expensive. They take care of things and they can do work for a period of time while you're away. The negative to this is similar to the water changes. If we always think to myself, well, I've got an auto feeder in there and I only need to refill it once a week, you might get into a habit of where you don't watch your fish enough. And I know that sounds crazy to all of us fish keepers, but when you get super busy, maybe you got some other stuff going on outside of your life that has nothing to do with your fish, that impacts the amount of time you're spending with your fish temporarily, even temporarily, you might get a little complacent and not pay much attention. You're just like, I need to go in. It's going to take me 20 minutes to go through and refill all my auto feeders, and then I need to get out, right? And you might not be looking for some of those telltale signs of the health of your fish that you would otherwise catch when you're hand feeding them. For me personally, I love automatic water change systems. I think they're phenomenal if you're doing a dedicated fish room. But I personally would never use auto feeders because I like using the time of feeding my fish to watch their behavior, to see if everybody's grouping up and eating, or is there somebody that's straggling in the back and not really eating it all. Maybe I need to pay attention to that fish. Maybe isolate that fish into a place because maybe something's stressing them out and I need to give them a little extra TLC to help nurse them back to health and get them back into the groove, right? So that they're back with the rest of the fish doing their thing that I would expect as behavior, as opposed to the behavior I happen to be observing. When I feed my fish, that's my time to check the health of the fish that I keep and love so much. Another one that came from a chat that Paul Soltero mentioned, automatic light timers. Here's one where you're going to, my opinion, I might not even put a negative. Let's be honest. I might not play devil's advocate. Light timers are amazing. Whether they're built in or you're using a Casa like Wi-Fi timer, any of those. I love the Casa ones just because they're built like tanks. Maybe you're using the old school mechanical ones. You know, there's like this big a brick for one plug. I don't know if you've seen some of the really old mechanical timers for plugs, but man, some of them are chunky boys. But what this does is it maintains consistent, uniform on-off time with your lights or CO2. And in conjunction, these two are very critical to have working in timers together rather than letting them run constantly or being reliant. Because when we're reliant on ourselves, oh yeah, 5 days a week, Bentley's up and down to the fish room at 7 a.m. Before he's going to work, he's doing this, lights come on, feed the fish. But Bentley doesn't get home until 7 p.m. So those lights are on and he wants to enjoy his fish for a little bit when he gets home. So they're Now they're getting light until 8 or 9 o'clock at night before you're finally turning them off. But on the weekends, you'll sleep in a little bit. Bentley's not down in the fish room until 9 a.m., maybe 10 a.m. Maybe he's going to play some video games for a little bit because it's his time to play every once in a while. Or he's going to walk the dog a little extra. Or maybe I've got something I'm playing where me and the wife are going somewhere and I spaced and forgot to hit my fish room and now the lights aren't on. And that inconsistency can lead us to problems like algae or plant health issues, plants getting oversaturated with light, whatever that may be, right? So that's the negative mostly of not having timers on your lights and CO2, or even worse, let's say there's no timer on your CO2 and you're relying on this old thing, this old noodle, and you get distracted, lights go off, and I got to put my whatever's left for my dinner away, and I got to take care of this. I got to empty my dehumidifier, and you take the dog for another walk. I got to spend a little time with the kids, whatever the heck it may be, right? And then you don't realize until the next day, I never turned my CO2 off. And you could have, very potentially, gassed your fish overnight. Right? So this is where automation is your best friend. Lights and CO2. Because they make things consistent every single day. And consistency is key, especially for us Planet Tank nerds, to having success, getting that balance, and mitigating problems like algae, health issues, etc. You can also look at like autodosers, but I don't think we want to dig that deep. Basically, there is an occasion where automation is a bad thing. And for me, my opinion is it's when there's too much automation. If we use too many things automated to where it's very easy to ignore our tanks for a long period of time, like that combination of automatic water change and automatic feeder, if you have like an automatic doser for your fertilizer, if you're planting tanks and all that, so that basically you're like, oh, I really only need to go in there and do some work once a week. You could miss the little details that if you were spending that time, even just feeding your fish every day, or whatever that one thing might be. For some people, it is water changes and some of that maintenance. That's their time to observe their fish and plant health or stuff like that. When you automate so much that you become complacent and you start ignoring things, that's when you start running into problems. However, I think removing some of those complications that in general increase your overall fish health. Automatic water change is a good example. Having consistent lighting and CO2 with timers, etc. Great example. That's when I think automation is absolutely a positive in our hobby. But it can get to a point of where too much of it can become a negative. Just like life. If everything's automatic, things are probably going to go bad. But if a few things are automatic, we get to focus on the things that we need to. And overall, there's a better quality of life that occurs. All right. Rye Guy Outdoors, like I check all my tanks and fish every day. Awesome. You know, that's what you want. You want something that makes it so that it doesn't even need to be every single day. It's like I fast my tanks once a week. So there's at least one day a week. Sometimes I'll do it twice a week. During the summer, I'll do it a little more, twice a week typically, where I'll just chill and let my tanks be that. And I just mostly am paying attention to like, make sure the dehumidifier is running where it needs to run, all that kind of stuff. That can be okay as long as it's scheduled and it's not like, well, I'm going to not feed my fish for like 5 days in a row, right? You don't want things like that. You want to have some regularity where you're actively paying attention to your fish outside of just like enjoying them, right? But you don't want to get to the point of where you're becoming into pure ignorance. All right. So Leo had a question, and we'll get into that. We'll do question and answer at this point, folks. If you do at Bentley Pasco, makes it super easy for me to see your questions, and we'll be rolling from there. What is your opinion on squeezing a sponge from an established filter into a new tank? So, filter gravy is a thing, as we like to call it. Filter gravy can be extremely helpful for jump-starting your biological bacteria all that beneficial bacteria that you want to do all your biological filtration. Extremely effective. However, you do need to keep in mind that if you have dealt with any kind of disease, parasite, etc., you should inherently know that there's a risk of spreading it by doing that same thing. So, like with rainbow fish, as an example, because fish TB or mycobacterium is so prevalent a problem in rainbow fish, and what I mean is that they're very, very susceptible to it, we typically don't do that out of pure paranoia in the rainbow fish hobby. Now, if you've had really, really consistent parameters and you know where you got your fish and you know that it's not an issue and you have to really know your sources, then yeah, you're probably fine setting up a new tank, giving it a little squeeze and helping jumpstart that biologic process. But I would caution you that you really need to be absolutely confident in the health of the tank that filter material is coming from. As long as you're confident, it's a great way to jumpstart a tank, but you still need to allow that tank to go through some process. It doesn't instantly cycle a tank. No. It speeds up the process. So don't think like, oh, I just bought some fish. I'm getting them shipped to myself. They're going to be here tomorrow. I'll go squeeze out my filter, my sponge filter from one tank in this brand new tank I just set up, and it'll be perfect tomorrow. No. That's not the case. But it can jumpstart that process and speed up the rate at which we get to that point of where ammonia is being processed into nitrite. Nitrite is being processed into nitrate, where we have the full nitrogen cycle of bacteria present in our aquarium. It's a jumpstart. It's kind of like the more active version of going out and buying something like any of the enzyme products or any of the quick starts, etc. It's the more direct process of creating that. It's faster than those products, typically, not always. Some of those products are extremely effective if you know how to use them correctly, but you're getting healthier, in quotation marks, because you're getting active bacteria instead of like dormant bacteria that start their population. Hope that makes sense. In general, I like the process. It's useful, but if you're a rainbow fish psycho like me, you're kind of like, I'll just set a tank up with some plants and wait like 3 months, and that's okay. Patience is a virtue in rainbow fish. All right, here. So from Chibi Faith, that's my wife. You should tell them how I survive your fish hobby. She survives my fish hobby mostly by laughing at dojo loaches. Also, like in general, so a small story time for maybe those who are a little newer or haven't been around for when I've told this before. When my wife and I were originally dating, very early in our relationship is when I got back into fish. And I remember because I called her when I was first ordering this tank, right? When I first got back into fish, and I was like, hey, do you like fish tanks? And she was like a beta? And I'm like, yeah, freshwater fish tanks. So probably not necessarily a beta. I like fish, but like, tetras and angelfish, things like that. And she was like, oh yeah, I like fish. It's like, cool. So I'm thinking about having a fish tank. I haven't had one in a long time since I was a kid, and I'd really like to have a fish tank again. And she was like, that sounds great. You should do it. Months later, I have several fish tanks. Entire rooms of my house are getting taken up by them. But what I used to do, because my wife is very into photography, especially macro photography, is I would steadily teach her little things about the fish and show her all the bad pictures that I had taken, and then got her to start taking pictures of her own. And I kind of challenged her, especially when she first moved into my home, was like, do a couple of pictures a day and find the one picture a day that you like the most. And she would do things like weird light reflecting through some of the stained glass windows that are in my house. There's like kind of two, kind of in big quotation marks. There's really like 1.5, but it's built into one of our doors. Or like, things that were out in the lawn, some of the flowers in the garden during springtime, and then some of the different plants or fish that were in some of my aquariums. And so I used one of her hobbies, photography, to slowly get her interested, or at least accepting. And she's always been very supportive, but more like getting her into a point of understanding why I love fish as much as I do. And through that, she's steadily come to learn and love lots of things about fish that I like. And then also fell in love with dojo loaches and a few other kind of sillier, more interesting fish because of weird parts of their behavior or things they do. The fact that dojo loaches fart in the aquarium is hysterical to both of us. The first time we saw it, we were scared out of our minds. But then once we read up and realized, like, oh no, this is how they move atmospheric gas through their bodies and helps them balance themselves, because they kind of sort of don't have a swim bladder, but kind of sort of do. They're very strange fish in general. That's kind of something that she came to appreciate fish in a very different way than I have. And it's been very interesting because we get to talk about the things that we both like every once in a while. And me doing all the YouTube and all that kind of stuff has been crazy, to say the least, but more that she's come to appreciate it for different things. And she has, her own hobbies that she goes deep on. So we'll have long conversations about like Pokemon, for example. I am not super well versed in Pokemon. I played like some of the really old games, and I recently played one of the newer ones, but not the newest. I played the Sword and Shield, for those who played those. And, it was trying to understand her hobby, the way that she has rather gracefully come to understood mine. And so that's one of the beautiful parts of our relationship, is we find things that we're each interested in and try to teach our hobbies to each other through the things we know that interest each other, that we can hook them on that part of our hobby. So that's kind of how she survives my psychosis of having many, 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 many gallons of water throughout our house. Oh, man. My life is crazy. Aha! Mr. Greg Jones, who, if you haven't seen, recently started his own product line with his channel. If you haven't seen that video, I suggest you go check it out. It's got some cool, what's the word I want? Botanicals. That's the word I'm looking for. I almost said bioorganics. I don't know why that popped into my head, but some cool botanicals and stuff that he's selling on the Amazons. Greg Jones says, I have a continuous drip water change system, and it's a life changer. It has saved me over 1,000 hours of mindlessly changing water. I do manual feeding to spend at least 5 minutes a day checking fish. And that's basically where I want to be whenever I can build my dream fish room, or the fish room that I'd like to have, as opposed to fish all over my house, and having a more cohesive, built for purpose room. Not necessarily. I don't know if I'm going with a continuous drip versus something that does like a sprinkler system and automates a certain number of changes per day, etc., or an amount of water per day, maybe more accurately. But yeah, I totally can relate to the removing some of that maintenance time so you can focus elsewhere and use your time more effectively on the things that help. And for me, manual feeding is the biggest thing. Manual feeding is one of the best ways for me, especially with rainbow fish, just to see their behavior. And there's a lot of things you can, when you start spending enough time watching rainbow fish, like, crazy people on the internet do, you start learning like little behaviors that tell you that one fish is not doing well, but might not necessarily be sick compared to the rest of the fish. But even though when you're not feeding them, they'll all swim together and they seem okay, there's little behavioral things you can look for that start telling you, something's a little up. We better monitor this for a little bit more. And then if you continue to see that behavior for a week or two, it's like, okay, now we need to start really doing something more proactively to solve the problem, right? And that's where I love feeding my fish by hand, because I can spend that time when I'm feeding a tank and just kind of throw some food in, watch them for a couple minutes, okay, move to the next tank, and then come back after the food's starting to dissipate or be completely taken care of, and watch that behavior through that period of time, because it's really important for me, at least, for catching issues with my fish. Kingfisher's Catch, my non-show tanks have auto feeders. I forget those sometimes, unfortunately. Yeah, it can happen. From Brandon, saltwater has all the cool high-tech auto stuff, even got auto filter changer. Yeah, but the problem is, to me, some of the... Okay, one thing. A lot of the saltwater automation products are drastically more expensive than they need to be. They do not need to be as expensive as they are. As somebody who works in tech, constantly works with devices, and understands like the base level tech that they're operating off of, man, Apex is like got to be just killing it, or they're sourcing their parts like horribly, because the amount they charge for their systems and what they do, it's mind-boggling the amount of money they have to be making. I'm sorry, because that hardware is not that expensive. But you know what do I know? Guppy Girl, I like pulling out algae because then I am forced to focus on plants and fish and see how they are doing. Yeah, see? Little things like that. I've actually been fighting off some algae in Fallen Forest right now. And, you know, I do once a week, I sit and I spend a lot of time manually pulling out some of the hair algae I'm fighting, and I'm slowly getting less and less and less and less. I had a big bad outbreak that kind of came out of nowhere. And I'm fighting it off, but I have a combination of like hair algae and a little touch of staghorn. So I'm fighting these in two different ways, and it also gives me time to monitor to see what plants are still doing okay versus where I need to maybe change some plants out or make some adjustments to that tank to help it get through the tail end of this algae issue and get to where I want it, that optimal, like, everything's happy and looking beautiful and wonderful, right? Perfect time to spend things and get away from things that could be less hands-on, but would also make it harder for us to know the optimal path to take to get it back to where we want it. Hiraki and Miles, I'm old school. I do it all myself, even use buckets. I ain't doing buckets, man. I got a Python for a reason. I don't want to change that much water via bucket. I got a lot of tanks. Most of them are 40 breeders. That's a lot of water to do work on. Leo 209, wouldn't using some hardscape with algae be the same thing? I think I'm missing something in here, but as opposed to like say plants or a period of time, sure. Yeah, I mean hardscape's going to transfer an amount, but there's, in all that mulm that's in your filter, there is an amount of bacteria that lives in that. So when you're spreading all of that out throughout your tank, and then it slowly populates everywhere and gets into your filter and stuff like that, it's a faster process because it has a better concentration of bacterial colony in it naturally. If that makes sense, than say like just the surface bacteria, because getting the surface bacteria to move from that hardscape or algae around the rest of the tank is a little more difficult than in the mulm itself. Plus the mulm is going to have some amount of food source, blah, 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 blah. Brandon, I wish I could auto everything and focus on playing with genetics. Hey, if you're taking the time and you're paying a lot of attention, that's fine. My concern, especially with anyone who's like, I want to auto everything, is that we don't pay enough attention at a regular enough cadence to catch some of the telltale signs that we can do preventative work to prevent big disease problems or some other issue. Tommy O, hi, what about auto top off versus auto manual? I don't think auto top off is necessarily a problem. It's one of those things where it's like, as long as you're monitoring parameters of your water and know that eventually you're probably going to need to do a water change, that's perfectly fine, right? Auto top offs are great, especially if you have certain filtration systems, or maybe you're using like overflows and you want to make sure water's always optimal so that proper water is getting into a sump or whatever filtration unit you're using, no problem with that. I probably would benefit greatly from an auto top off system in my Guppy mansion. But I just pay enough attention to it that I know, like, I start hearing a certain sound, it's time to top off the tank or do a water change, which is usually Thursday every week. Thursdays, Guppy Mansion is water change time. That's almost guaranteed every Thursday in my house. Guppy Mansion water change. Or at least the top off. At least the top off. That thing has so many plants. It doesn't have to water change constantly, but it does get regular water changes. And when it does, they're big boys because that's a big tank. Doing a 50% water change in that thing takes some time. It's like 150 gallons of total water between the filter and the tank itself. So draining out about 70-ish gallons of water and replacing it takes a little time. Fish Family, thank you. 5 gifted memberships. Congratulations to all the new members. Welcome to the jungle. You now might have access to the super secret member Discord. If you use Discord, it's basically the Bentley Bat Phone. Just ask Leo. Leo is the most prominent user of the Bentley Bat Phone. He is making sure he's getting his membership value. Let me tell you. And there's nothing wrong with that. Hey. So, gifted memberships to Rye Guy Outdoors, Lisa Sparkman, Nathan Hovey, Bill Coleman, Connor Costello, and Renee House. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you, Fish Fam Link. Appreciate you, buddy. Good to see you, too. Good to see you. I still need to submit my stupid, I need to do different art for a badge through you. Because I love the badge concept for Fish Fam Link. I think that's very, very smart. That's one of the things that you're doing that I love the most. Oh man. Okay, let me catch back up to where I was in chat because we jumped because we know Bentley talks too much, and he gets behind. Kingfisher's Catch, have you yet confirmed the possibility of a Dojo Loach powered filter? No, they're way too mobile for that. They go all over the place. Liquid Zoo, I don't fart, I move atmospheric air. Nice. Oh, man. This is why I love, this is part of the fish community I love the most is when we have our own enjoyable, like, slightly scientific nerd jokes. They're the best. This is another... Man, this is a dangerous suggestion. I almost don't want to read this out, but from Guppy Girl. Future Pokemon Aquascape. Depending on a phone call I have later this week. Maybe. Maybe. I may or may not be talking to a certain company about a potential role with their company. We'll see. Still very early, so, can't say, like, I'm going to work here, but it's like, I got contacted by somebody, and I was like, that's usually a good sign. Usually a good sign. Caitlin DeRozier, I was thinking I might get some rainbows at the auction, but if they're susceptible to TB, should I be worried about ones I'm purchasing coming with TB? I'm paranoid about my puffer. Okay, great question. It's more that rainbow fish haven't been in the hobby for as long as a lot of other aquarium fish. And unfortunately, Mycobacterium, for the most part, is far more prevalent in captive aquariums than it is in the wild. We don't really see a lot of Mycobacterium in the wild. I'm sure, like, Kelly Foreman is just going to destroy me in chat at some point over this, but still, I maintain this, and I don't care. But in our glass boxes, there's really not a lot of places for that delusion to occur to prevent Mycobacterium if it is in your system. And because rainbows have not been around Mycobacterium as long as some other fish, their natural defenses against myco are very, very weak. So it's very easy, if myco is in your system, for rainbows to catch it and die from it. Where some other fish that have been in the hobby a lot longer are actually very, very good about resisting it and not having those problems and basically living their life without any problem that myco could cause. That being said, within Greater Seattle Aquarium Society, there are really about 4 major people who regularly will bring rainbow fish to auctions. None of them are people who are negligent of paying attention to mycobacterium. All of them are very, very, very aware of how prevalent and weak rainbows can be to it. So when they see it, they very frequently, unfortunately, basically either A, euthanize that entire tank and strip it completely down and nuke the site from orbit, so to speak, or lock that tank off. They never sell fish from that tank ever again, and they let those fish live out their lives. This guy, when I used to more regularly breed fish, I let them live out their lives because they can still live for a decent amount of time. But I don't want to have that spread to any other fish that I carry, and I certainly don't want to sell fish that could potentially deal with myco issues and spread them. So with that being said, there's the locals that are really good to buy from. I can tell you their member numbers, or I'll know based on the fish that come in. So Caitlin, if you're at the event, come have a chat with me Saturday. Just come find me. Like, hi, I'm Caitlin. What are the good people to buy from? And I can tell you, and you'll be all right. But like Hoon Aquatics is a great example. He's very, very aware. There's another gentleman who's one of his friends, Jason, who's in our club. He's another crazy rainbow fish person. He's very good about paying attention to that. Like we're all very mindful of myco when it comes to rainbow fish because we want more and more people to get into rainbows. So we're really all kind of active scouts to protect against that. Andy Carson. With auto light timers, what is the best time of day or night to add supplements or plant foods? How does CO2 change that timing? Some of my tanks have CO2, but most don't. Ooh, great question. So, Andy, in general, think of it like us. Early in the morning, you get up, when the lights come on, within about the first hour of us being at light, if you talk to a lot of doctors or dietitians, you should in theory eat your first meal within an hour of waking up. Most of us don't, but if you're trying to be optimal, that's what you should be doing. Or at least that's what my dietitian tells me. It's similar for fish. Within about an hour of things waking up, we kind of want to feed them, right? A lot of our fish like eating early in the day, but not all. Plants, if you're going to fertilize, and especially if you're a person who fertilizes small amounts every day, like this guy, then what you want to do is fertilize early in the day. Because then that fertilizer is there through as much of the daylight time as possible for your plants to uptake and utilize those resources. Where this changes with CO2 is not in the fertilizer, but in how we turn CO2 on and off. CO2 takes a little time to build up in the water column, especially if you're at low CO2 amounts, like I tend to preach. That low and slow method, the American barbecue method of CO2, that's the Bentley Special. What I typically do is I have my CO2 come on, depending on the plants in the tank, 30 minutes to an hour before the light starts to do its sunrise. Or if your lights just come on and off, before the lights come on. This allows CO2 to build up in the water system, but not at a dangerous level. If you're pushing very high levels of CO2, you might only have it come on half an hour before in a really dense tank, or maybe only 15 minutes. Depends on whether you do a slow sunrise or whether your lights just are on, right? Slow sunrise, you could do like 15 minutes before. Just on, half an hour is probably good. Maybe upwards of an hour if you're going really low CO2 volume, right? And then that lets that build up. So Plants can use it throughout the day. It keeps coming in. You keep having that CO2 prevalent. And then if you are going to sunset, I like to stop my CO2 as my sunset begins. Because that way, the CO2 that's going to linger in the tank as the light dies off and the photosynthesis isn't quite as powerful, they'll consume the last little bits of CO2 in the water. I'm not adding extra CO2. If I just turn my lights off, I typically like to stop CO2 1 hour before my lights go off. That gives plenty of time for the last bits of CO2 to get into the water column and for the plants to utilize that CO2 and get the CO2 concentration levels low enough to where overnight, when no CO2 is going to be consumed by those plants, it'll be completely safe for my fish. I hope that helps, Andy. That's kind of my method there. I like dosing my fertilizers earlier in the day. Typically what I do is I walk around, I quickly dose all my tanks with fertilizer, and then I pick up my fish food and I go feed my fish. The only exception to that is if I'm using like a powdered fertilizer and I'm putting the powder direct in the tank. Then I do something a little different. Because I don't want, if I have fish in there, I don't want the fish to try and eat the fertilizer. Usually they ignore it, but sometimes, dumb fish do dumb things. Rocky Miles, I was at my local fish store today, and there were two gals looking at tanks, and one says to the other, "How do you not think this is great? Makes me wonder what's wrong with you as a person." Oh my lord. The things we overhear when we miss certain amounts of context can be hilarious at times or terrifying at others. Oh man. All right. Catch up. Ooh, big jump. Alyssa Bentley, perhaps you will breed them again when your fish room is built. Oh, absolutely. When I get my fish room built, part of the design of the fish room is to specifically set it up so that certain things are easier to go back to actively breeding rainbow fish. And maybe a couple species of Corydoras and some plecos. I'm going to keep doing the honeycomb, the Wobbin Mooster plecos because I love them. Alyssa has one of my species of pleco that is complicated. That's why they're in her hands, because I'm an idiot. And she's good at plecos. But there's some other plecos, like I eventually want to have a colony of zebra plecos again. Just because I love that fish. They're just so striking, and I can't help but want to have them again. No matter how ridiculously expensive they will be. And they're a giant patience game, but that's kind of the fun. Kind of the fun is getting into the point of where they do that thing, and they finally make babies, and you're like, glorious victory, I waited 3 years for this. And then you're like, I got 6. That might pay for food for the next year. Christopher Williams, quick digression from fish. Come on, man. What do you play in Final Fantasy 14? I don't have my hat anymore. Well, I have my hat, but I'm not wearing it. I am a Black Mage player. I play specifically Black Mage and basically only Black Mage when it comes to raids. I will occasionally play either healer or tank in dungeons or just to help people, just because the queues were super long as DPS. I played a lot of jobs, but my main is Black Mage, and then I also enjoyed Warrior and Astrologian. Warrior's probably my favorite of the tanks, although the Gunblade was interesting when I was leveling it up before I stopped playing, and Scholar is the other healer that I like, but Astrologian's a lot more fun. I just like the card system that is used. I've also played both Bard and Machinist quite extensively. I like Machinist a little more than Bard, even though Bard is just generally a better class. It's better designed, but Machinist is really fun. I haven't seen any of the balancing in the most recent expansion, though, so maybe that's changed. I'm not too big on Monk. Dragoon's okay. Samurai was fun, but not as fun as the range classes. And then I also like Red Mage quite a lot. Red Mage was interesting, but I still have more fun playing Black Mage. I like gigantic nuclear weapons in living form. It's really what it comes down to. I like big, giant numbers, that make me feel better about myself because I've hit the enemy for all of it instead of lots of little bits of it. That's my jam, man. That's my jam. Spend Courtney. Hey, if Mr. Courtney, if you're still in chat, give me a call. We should talk a little bit. It concerns you greatly, my good friend. Oh man, I'm gonna start causing problems soon via my stream. It's gonna be bad. But yeah, I hope that helps understand my. You can actually go back really deeply into my channel, and you'll find a number of Black Mage guides that I did before I started doing fish content on this channel, where there weren't very many guides on how to do the Black Mage rotation correctly very early on, especially during like Heaven's Ward, and good lord, why is my brain messing up? Heaven's Ward. Then it was what? Stormbringer? Jeez, I'm not remembering the expansions, but the next expansion after Heaven's Ward. There weren't a lot of really good rotation videos for Black Mage back then. I used to make some to help people and did all sorts of class guides. It was something that I did prolifically when I played a lot of Final Fantasy XIV. Now I basically play almost no video games at all. Except for a little bit of Diablo 2 here and there, just because I love Diablo 2. And eventually when Diablo 4 comes out, I'll probably play Diablo 4. Because I may or may not have played in some of the betas and they were fun. What can you do? Good question. Raphael S. Bentley, do you have a preference for CO2 regulator? Yes and no. So I have a number of different CO2 regulators. I have the Aquarium Co-op one, and so far I'm actually really liking it. Coincidence that I'm wearing the hat. It just matches my shirt. The green matches my shirt, sorry. And I haven't worn this in a while, and I like this hat way more than the other Co-op hats. Just, I love this style of logo. I think it's, from a pure design standpoint, I love it. Anyway, stop shilling for the Co-op. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, chat. I do like that one. I really like the CO2 art ones in general, just because they're relatively good construction, not excessively costed. But I think Co-op is offering a really strong competition to like CO2 art and the nicer F zones. There were some really cheap F zones that are terrible, but the nicer F zones that are very similar in build to the CO2 art are relatively good. And then if you really want to go crazy and spend a stupid amount of money on something that is basically built to be indestructible, you would look at the GLA, Greenleaf Aquariums. I have a GLA one. It's rock solid. It's been running for 6 years like it's day one. It's incredible. But I think between that older GLA and some of the new ones, there are improvements. And so if you really want something hyper premium that will last you an eternity, GLA is really good. If you don't want to spend a stupid amount of money, and I fully admit it's a stupid amount of money for those things, look at the Co-op or CO2 art. You can also look at the slightly nicer F-Zone ones. They're very similar in quality to those two, but I would say if you're in the United States and you have access to Co-op, probably the best bang for your buck for an expandable manifold. One, it has really good tension in all the places you need it to be, so you can dial in that CO2 really nicely. It's not crazy expensive. I think overall they did a good job selecting that particular CO2 regulator and getting it set up for people that want to dive into CO2. Can you go crazier? Absolutely. There's CO2 has like bound to cause problems, and that's basically anything below like $80. Bound to be a problem. Then you have this huge kind of window of a little more expensive, but still, if you think about for the quality and what the product does, very good. And this is where like Co-op, CO2 art, F-Zone, a lot of those all fall into. There are more. Those are just the ones I have the most personal hands-on experience with. Then there's this like window up here of bat-s freaking crazy. And that's like Greenleaf Aquariums and all those other ones where you're like, so a CO2 regulator is how many dollar reduce? And you're like, well, a co-op one's like $140, and this one with only one thing and it's not even expandable is $400. You start running into some of those, and they're crazy, badass crazy. But I will say, in my experience, with some of the crazy ones that are out there, you can get things that are so well built and rock solid, you basically just never have to worry about them and the way they're designed. But is that difference from like reasonable but good quality to badass crazy worth it? Probably not. Almost certainly not. I would say the only ones that I'm kind of not impressed by, despite them being in that higher tier of cost, are some of the Aquatechs. I've got two different Aquatechs. I have the one designed for a paintball canister, and my big problem with that is the needle valve. It just is, it's so easy to go from barely anything to way too much. And the same thing happens in the bigger one. In both of them, their needle valves just suck. And for the cost that you're paying compared to some of the newer designed ones, and maybe Aquatech has changed their design, and I'm just talking like old man, yells at cloud. But the ones that I have, I stopped using them because they're just not good enough at fine tuning. I either have not enough or way too much. And the difference is feels like I'm barely moving it. It's like, too much. Oh, nothing. Way too much. Oh, damn it. Where the co-op, and CO2 art and all those, you've got a lot of room and you can feel it's very resistant, which is good for being very fine-tuny. Yeah. One of those things. Just my personal experience with CO2 regulators. They're out there and they do all sorts of crazy things. Or you can be like Paul Sotero and have all your plants grow like weeds without CO2 and just never need it. Paul, stop bragging. Oh man, Paul, I can't wait to see you again at Keystone Class, buddy. It was just such a hoot at Triple Crown hanging out with you and your wife. You folks, you are the reasons why I love traveling out to events, to be able to meet people that we interact with regularly, right? We see each other in streams all the time, all kind of stuff. Being able to sit down and nerd out. It's the best. It is the best. Guppy Girl, what type of fertilizers and remineralizers do you like? I don't really use a lot of remineralizers. I specifically tend to use just crushed coral because there's so little in my water that I can just use crushed coral to get it up where I need it. I don't worry about hitting a perfect target TDS. I've just kind of over time found a range that I fall into. And as long as I'm using things in my tank accordingly, the other thing you could use that is kind of good for raising your hardnesses is montmorillonite clay. Safety Zorb is montmorillonite clay. It's really good at raising hardness in your water, but not excessively if you use small amounts. And it looks pretty, which is nice, right? It will pull some things out at first, but don't stress about that too much. Fertilizer, I've tried a lot of different things. In general, I tend to use just Easy Green. And part of that is co-ops local to me. I love supporting local companies whenever I can. I've tried the Nylock G Thrive. I've tried the Flourish line. The Flourish line is just way too much work for me personally. I am actively trying a powdered fertilizer that's called Hector's Everything right now. I'm basically testing it in a tank. I have some kind of mixed results for that, which is why I haven't been hey, if you want to get it, contact this person. But I think it's really well designed, that particular product, if you want a powdered fertilizer for more high-tech tanks. That's where it's very good. I'm not really big on the EI dosing method, although I have bought some powdered fertilizer through Greenleaf Aquariums in the past, and also through Nylock G sells some of that stuff. You can also get them through, I think Boost Plant has some. When I'm trying to dose really specific things. So if I want potassium, specifically potassium, I typically get a powdered potassium and mix a small amount of it to dose If I have large amounts of Java Fern, they're starting to have issues and I need extra potassium. That's kind of my go-to, as opposed to say like Flourish Potassium. Although Flourish Potassium is fine, it's just that's cheaper. I've tried some of the ADA fertilizers. It felt way overpriced for what I was getting, so I just kind of stopped. Haven't really messed around with like Tropica, which is one of the other more common ones. It's just been a matter of I would have to ship it in. It becomes costly enough that it doesn't feel worth it compared to just like E-Bottle O Easy Green. And I have such good success with it that it's hard to justify myself going and messing with other things when I have good success with something that I like. So you know how it is. Like, you find the thing that works, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It doesn't matter. So many of these fertilizers are so close to each other that realistically it's not like, oh, Easy Green is the greatest because XYZ. No. Easy Green, Nylock G Thrive, Dustin's, Grow Juice, Greg Sage's powdered stuff, they're all good. There's just slight differences between all of them that may or may not matter in your aquarium. Some people get excessive algae when they use Easy Green, but when they use Nylock G Thrive, they don't, and vice versa. I've seen a number of people that love Greg Sage's Select Aquatics powdered fertilizer and have had tons of success with it. So, you know, it's one of those things where, like, are you already having success with something? Don't change it. Even if it's not what I use, don't change it. Because if you're having success, that's what matters. If it works in your system, don't change it. Unless it's something where, like, the cost is becoming prohibitive and you need to find a solution that is more economically friendly for you, then that makes sense. But there's no reason to change a product if it's working. Yeah, it's one of those things. Yeah, like, a lot of people love the 2-hour Aquarius stuff. It's not commonly available out here, although it is one of the ones I kind of want to try. So I might end up shipping some to myself eventually, in some more, like, dedicated testing down the line when I have the setup to do so. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, there's so many options out there. Find the one that works for you and just stick to it. Don't worry about, like, well, Bentley likes this one, and, you know, this guy says use this, where this person says only do EI dosing, and then there's this one guy who's like, I don't dose fertilizer at all, and look at all these amazing things. You know, whatever it may be. All sorts of things are different depending on your tanks. Like, here we go. Alyssa Bentley does not live very far from me. Literally a 10-minute drive. Has problems with algae with Easy Green. Excellent results with Thrive. I use Easy Green all the time. Never have a problem. Right? It works different for everyone. You know, Cliff Andrews in chat uses the GLA ferts, and they're pretty reasonably costed. Even though GLA is normally, like, overcosted for everything, they're actually pretty reasonably done. If you have something that works well, just keep using it. Don't worry about what I use. There's tons of stuff out there. Tons of stuff. If I were to, like, dig down to the nitty gritty, there's all sorts of crazy things. If you're talking about, like, root tabs, my personal favorite root tab is none of the capsules. I love the stupid Flourish tabs. I love those things. And I hate the normal Flourish line, but I love their root tabs. So, like, you know, you just find these things that work well for you and you just keep going to them. But yeah, okay. We're a little past 7. Let me see if there's anything else I've missed. Just want to make sure. J4 Aquatics, I don't think Robs is here right now. I'll probably talk to him relatively soon, though. It's been a few days, and we talk like every couple of days nowadays, so we'll have to chatter soon. But I think I've actually caught... Okay, here we go. Christopher Williams, any chance we'll get your thoughts, maybe in a video, about the best way to break into fish keeping in 2023 from the ground up? That is a really cool video idea. Let me tell you, I'll use this as my last little bit, and I'll probably go a little over when I wanted to. But when don't I go over, right, folks? For me, I would say this. Find a good tank size for you. Me personally, I would say a great starter tank size is something like the 20-gallon long. You can get them at $1 per gallon sale. They don't cost you a ton of money. They're not super huge, and you can do a decent amount in them without going overkill. But if you are into larger fish, you don't want a tank that's too small. So the first thing I would do is go to a fish store. If you don't have a local fish store, watch a bunch of videos online. Maybe look at a wonderful online fish store like Dan's Fish. There's lots of them out there, but I love Dan's. So, go to Dan's Fish. And just look at a bunch of the fish. Look at the pictures of them and just go, well, I kind of like this and I kind of like that. Maybe I just want this like one big centerpiece fish. Maybe you're into like, you want to do just a couple of bettas, right? You don't need a huge tank for that. Or you want to do community fish. Well, you need some bigger things. You might need like lots of small fish. Maybe you want Rasboras. Whatever it is that catches your eye. Find the thing that catches your eye and then go look up a video. Just look up a video where you can watch that fish swim around. If you can't see one at a local store. If you have a local store, go to a local store and do this thing. Watch that fish for 5 to 10 minutes. Maybe it's multiple videos, whatever it may be. And ask yourself, do I want to keep watching that fish? And if you say yes, okay. That's what we're going to start working with. But if you say no, we go shop around for some other fish. We find some other videos and we watch those and we see that thing that we're like, I really want to have this in my house. Then from there, here's what you're going to do. Research that fish. Now, unfortunately, research sometimes gets like not the most updated information, but there's a lot of great information on the internet. So just kind of look at the basics. How big does that fish get realistically in captivity, not in the wild? And what's the kind of suggested tank size for that fish? Can you realistically keep that size of tank in your home? If you can, like let's say you want to go with rainbow fish. Rainbow fish typically like a tank that is at least 4 foot side to side. So now you're looking at things like 75 gallons, 55 gallons, or bigger. Some of them, the smaller ones, do perfectly fine on a 40 breeder. So if these all work, right, if you find a tank size that works, okay. Figure out the best way to buy that tank economically. And I would suggest, if you can, if you got a Petco near you, wait for the $1 per gallon sale or the 50% off sale, and go in and buy that tank, just an Aqueon basic tank, cheap. Don't buy a used tank as your first tank. Buy a new tank. Now you got your tank, start setting it up. Are you going to do live plants? Okay, let's make sure we look at some substrate, watch some videos, start seeing what plants work with your area. Buy a test kit. Just test strips is fine. And test your water that comes out of the tap. What's your KH? What's your GH and your pH out of the tap? We don't want to fight our water. So if our water, it comes out of the tap at like 8 pH, very high GH, we probably don't want to do a hyper soft water fish. Right? We want to not fight our water. We want to make things easy on ourselves. And then from there, we can start really planning. What kind of filter are we wanting to use? Do you want to use a powered filter? Do you want to use sponges? Do you need heat? Figure out some heat. Right? All of these things help slowly plan. Take your time. The best part about 2023, if you're trying to get into the fish hobby, is there's a wealth of information and wonderful sources out there. But don't listen to only one source. Listen to multiple, because you're going to hear a little tidbit of information from this guy, and Bentley's going to tell you a little bit of this, and this other person is going to tell you a little bit of that. And if you add all that information together, you're going to have a more complete and complex picture of how to find success. Because one of the worst things is like, you're going to struggle a little bit. You'll find something, maybe too much algae, or maybe one particular plant you really like just doesn't want to do well. If you're Bentley, like you just can't keep shrimp, whatever it may be, right? You'll find these things that will slowly adapt your hobby. But for your first tank, patience is your best friend. Take lots of time, research as much as you can. And when you set up that first tank, don't rush to put fish into it. Give your filtration lots of time to get set up, and okay. You want to give time for things to set up. That is going to give you success. The biggest piece of advice I can give you is that patience in this hobby is your best friend. We will often run into problems in this particular hobby with fish, with these beautiful little living jewels, as my good friend Jason, who just entered the chat, likes to call them, when we rush. But when we take our time, that's when we find, usually, the most success. It is great to get into this hobby this time of life because there's so much information out there. So many things that we couldn't previously get or maybe didn't understand. There's lots of people that have kept it and better understand it and can teach us and help us to have success with those things. Patience is your friend. Just take your time. Your Dusty Baby Mama's Aquatics. What a name. What should I put in my new Lifeguard 3.8 gallon? Not a common Plecostomus. Honestly, I would look at a great nanofish or shrimp. Shrimp can do fine, although 3.8 is a little light on the gallonage, so there's a little swinginess, which can be rough. But something like some of the exclamation point rasboras or some of the small little rasboras, you can do a small school of them. They look great, and when they're in a tank that's nice and healthy, they look phenomenal. Some of the smaller betas can be okay. You can do like a singular beta, like a placard or something like that. They do great in small tanks like that. They don't need to be in like a little cup, but 3.8 gallons is enough for a beta to have a good life. What you don't want to go doing is putting some giant fish in there. Figure out what kind of appeals to you. Are you trying to do a couple of small fish or maybe just one fish? There you go. That helps answer your question. It's not about what I would put in there. It's about what you like and making sure that you don't go overboard, because you got to keep in mind, with a small number of gallons in your tank, my Dusty Baby Mama. That name is so great. I'm sorry, I can't help it. I have to say it again because it's so good. When you're dealing with small gallonage, we want to make sure that we're not putting too much bioload into it, because parameters can shift very quickly in small gallonages like that. So just, very lightly stocked is going to be your best friend. There you go. Maybe you only keep a snail in that thing if you just like snails. You never know. There's all sorts of crazy things you could do. All right. Everybody, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to Fish Family for the gift of membership. Pete Berlinski, Aquarium Plant Man, thank you for your member chat. And of course, your Dusty Baby Mama's Aquatics for your super chat and your question. I really appreciate it. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week. And if you are in the Seattle area, come say hi to me at the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society's general auction this Saturday in Northgate, which is part of Seattle. I'll be there pretty much the entire time. So come say hi. We can babble about fishy things. And yeah, I will see you all next week. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week and be watching out for this Saturday's video. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.